Good afternoon, everyone. I know we do still have some few people that may be trickling in here. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping things before we jump into it. So good afternoon. My name is Kyle Gonzalez. I use he, him, his pronouns. And for those of you that may not be able to see me today, I am currently wearing a long sleeve button down pink, purple, and blue plaid shirt. I have wavy brown hair that is combed back and a recently trimmed beard. And I work as the Assistive Technology Coordinator for the WSU Access Center on the Pullman campus. So welcome to the second day of our third annual Disability Awareness Symposium. So as I mentioned, before we get started, I'm just going to give a brief overview of the Access Center and what it is that we do, and just go over a few housekeeping items. So the WSU Access Center provides accommodations and services to incoming and current WSU students with disabilities that limit their access to the educational environment. Through this, we support the self-determination and development of students with disabilities through removing barriers to academic success, promoting self-advocacy, and providing support to foster student learning and engagement in all opportunities available at the university. We also help to foster support through awareness programming events throughout the year, all culminating with our annual symposium. The theme of this year's symposium is Fitness for All, Inclusive Fitness and Sport. This year, the symposium is held throughout the entirety of this week and will approach fitness from a holistic lens. It will include both mental and physical fitness events as well. The symposium will focus on mindfulness, mental health, physical health, and nutrition. We will also be offering a series of adaptive workout classes via Zoom or in person at the Chinook Center. Those adaptive fitness classes this week include Zumba, yoga, which will be happening today, later this afternoon, spin, weightlifting, and rock climbing. Now, extra credit and programming will be given to WSU student participants of this event. We will be posting a link to an exit survey at the end of the discussion, which will give an opportunity for you students to put in which group you will be getting credit for today. We encourage all participants to fill this out though, as it does help us improve our programming for future events. This symposium would not have been possible without the support of our partners. Those are SNA, University Recreation, the Graduate Professional Student Association, the WSU Graduate School, Outreach and Education, and Advance at WSU. And of course, as part of all our events, we like to acknowledge the land that we are on. So WSU would like to acknowledge that the WSU Pullman campus is located on the ancestral homelands of the Palouse people and on the ceded lands of the Nimipu Nez Perce tribe. Now, I would like to welcome you to Behind Happy Faces. Behind Happy Faces is a mental well-being training that includes interactive exercises to engage individuals in their emotional development. Today, we will learn a definition of mental health, expand our vocabulary for this topic, and go over the steps we can take to approach a friend who is struggling with a mental health issue. Please help me welcome Elizabeth Murray and Justice Etafo from WSU Health Promotion Team.
Thank you, Kyle. Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth. My pronouns are she, her. I am part of the Peer Health Education Program in Cougar Health Services, and me and Justice are both on the Mental Health Committee. So we're really excited to be here with you all today. I will be facilitating most of this workshop, and Justice is here kind of as my support staff. So you can feel free to message him if you have any issues. He'll also be managing the chat just in case I don't see your comments right away and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. All right, here we go. Okay, so we're going to start off by sharing some statistics to help us gain a better perspective of mental health among college students. So first, 25% of college students experience a mental health disorder during their time in college. Next, suicide is the second leading cause of death on college campuses, only behind car accidents as the first leading cause. And along with mental health disorders, students may deal with lack of sleep, body image issues, substance abuse, as well as other challenges. And I'm curious to know if any of you have any other challenges that college students may be facing, and feel free to type in the chat or unmute yourself if you have any ideas for that. Discrimination. Imposter syndrome, depression, self-esteem issues, social anxiety, chronic medical conditions. Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of challenges that students may be facing. We have another balancing work, family, and school, navigating stigmas, addiction, time management. Yeah, thank you all so much for participating. This just kind of shows there's a lot kind of going on in students' lives that may kind of lead to additional stressors and things like that. And lastly, 50% of students don't seek help for their mental health. And other sources tell us that this number is actually higher, that it's about 66%. And even if this is only 50%, that is one in every, that's half the students aren't going to seek help for when they need it. So for this first exercise, this is designed to kind of help us better understand the definition of mental health and the reasons why people may not be seeking help, as well as our own personal barriers to achieving effective ways of addressing challenges in our own lives. So this is going to be a group exercise. So in a moment, I'm going to put you all into breakout rooms. And what I would like you to do is designate one person to kind of jot down your answers. And I'd like you to just think of what comes to mind when you hear the words mental health. So it can be words, ideas, movies, people, songs, anything that comes to mind. And I'd like you all to come up with at least 10 things as a group, and just make sure you're keeping that paper or notepad of your answers, because we're going to come back to those. All right, is there any questions before I put you all in breakout rooms? All right, so I'll give you all about 3 minutes or so to do this, and then I'll pull you back in. All right, welcome back, everyone. So now that you have your list with your group, what I'm going to do is put you back in those same breakout rooms and go over what you came up with and count how many of your responses have negative connotations, positive connotations, and how many are neutral. And so I'll give you all about 2 minutes to do that and then count up if you had more negative, positive, or neutral connotations to your answers. All right, looks like everyone is back. If I could get one person from each group to either unmute themselves or share in the chat if they had more negative, positive, or neutral connotations to their answers. Okay, one group had neutral or neutral, lots of neutrals. One group had more negative or positive, neutral by one, more negative, neutral, but can be negative a lot of the time. Okay, so it looks like we had mostly neutral, one positive, and a few negatives. That's what I'm seeing. Oh, and one more neutral to positive. All right, why do you think it is that sometimes we come up with these negative answers maybe more than the positive ones?
For my group, like I said, like usually when we talk about it, it's more because the like mental health was negative. So I feel like it's brought up more when people are struggling. So I feel like that's why it can be like more negative connotation.
Yeah, that's a great point. So it's only really talked about more when it's in a negative circumstance. And in the chat, we have someone saying past stigma. Yeah, so that kind of stigma surrounding mental health. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? As men, mental health is seen as weak and unbecoming of what a man is supposed to be. Yeah, so that stereotypical, like manly, not supposed to be as sensitive to things, cultural differences in mental health stigma. Usually discussed when there is an issue. Yeah, so maybe if your mental health is just great, you're doing great, it's not something you talk about as much. Awesome. All right. Thank you all so much for sharing. Appreciate all your answers to that. So often people associate mental health with negative ideas. However, mental health is not about having a problem. It's the overall state of our thoughts and feelings and our ability to face the stresses and challenges that impact our well being. So, we did this exercise to identify what people think of when they hear those words mental health. So, it's important to know your thoughts in order to have an honest conversation about the topic. Often people associate mental health with negative ideas like the extremes, such as mental health disorders or suicidal ideation. And this is partly from that stigma surrounding this topic. However, mental health is not when a person has a problem. You can build your mental health like you do your physical health. For example, learning how to manage stress and emotions in a healthy way. So, this is the definition of mental health from the World Health Organization. It's a state of well being in which every individual realizes their own potential, can cope with the normal stressors of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. So, by realizing that mental health is really more in connection to overall wellness, we can start to decrease that stigma associated with it. In the context of our vocabulary, this is important because the way we talk about the things is very indicative of how we think and feel. So, this next exercise is going to help us recognize and learn about the mental health challenges we are all trying to address and see what others are going through as well. And I just want to note that this next exercise is completely anonymous, so you don't need to worry about that. And so, in exercise 2, we're going to be discussing these challenges we face to help us kind of identify and explore what you as well as your peers may be going through. So, in a moment, I'm going to share a link to a poll everywhere. And what you can do is type in one thing you wish people knew about you. And some examples of this could be a meaningful experience, something that happened to you or your family, a way you were treated due to your race or gender, maybe a fear you have about yourself, or maybe something you judge yourself on. And again, this is completely anonymous and it's optional. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. All right, so let me just switch my screen share. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that link in the chat for everyone. And you can also text in your answers as well to that number at the top there. So I'll give you all a few minutes to think about that and send in your answers. That I'm the main character. Prefer to be alone. That I also have feelings and need support. Even though it seems like I have everything together, sometimes things fall apart. I'm genuinely kind. Try my best to manage my mental health. Even though I'm a confident person, positive affirmation is still nice to hear. Some family issues, going through more unfortunate circumstances than people may think. I try hard, currently struggling, adjusting to new medications. I'm not my twin. I'm not always okay with everything. Family issues. I'm actually very caring and want to help whenever I can. How difficult it is to balance all aspects of life. Overthink a lot. Care a lot about others, but need others to care about me as well. There is more behind my smile. I can't be alone. How hard I try for school. I love myself. Love that. Just because I want to be alone doesn't mean I don't like you. I look like I have it all together, but my anxiety is always high. I love my body. I've been depressed, have bad anxiety, never want to say no, but sometimes feel like I need to. Grew up struggling to make ends meet. I'll give it a few more seconds to see if anyone else wants to send in their answer. Hate my body, afraid of failure. It's difficult for me to get up each and every day. Substances really are the only thing that give me comfort. I cry often. I feel like the people I've put first will never do the same. Sometimes I do drugs, not hard ones, just ones that change up my mind. My mental health negatively impacts my memory. Went through a really hard time, but feel guilty when I talk about it. I think about my body image the second I wake up and when I go to bed. Always depressed. All right. Looks like we got quite a lot of answers there. Thank you all so much for participating and being vulnerable and sharing those experiences with all of us today. Sex is the only thing that makes me feel a connection. heart been broken so many times. All right, I'm going to switch it back to the PowerPoint here. If you want to send it in still, feel free, and I can read them aloud. Okay. And real quick, if anyone has a word or thought or something that stayed with you from what was shared today, feel free to go ahead and type that in the chat or speak aloud to that. Because for me, it kind of showed that you don't always know what someone's going through, and we all kind of face challenges in our lives. In the chat, just always be kind. We never know what someone's going through. Someone said that you do stuff for friends that they don't do in return. That resonated with me a lot. Many of us struggle in silence. You may have a lot more in common with others than you think. hmm Yeah, so thank you all for sharing that. And then it looks like you all kind of started to answer these questions. What you learned from this exercise, that we all have a lot in common, and you never know what someone's going through. Um, so if anyone has another answer to these questions, or maybe that last one, do you feel more connected with others after hearing what was written down? Feel free to go ahead and type in the chat or unmute yourself. Yeah.
I don't judge a book by its cover, like really shows with some of the things that people said, because you never know if someone's like down or not.
Mhm. Right. Well, thank you all so much for participating and sharing and being vulnerable during that exercise. Looks like I got one more chat. I didn't realize a lot of us are fighting different and yet similar fights. Yeah, that's a great point. So as shown in this previous activity, we all have mental health challenges that affect us in various ways. At times, we may find it difficult to open up and share this with others, even though they may be going through something similar. So open and honest communication can be the first step towards normalizing these mental health challenges. So we did this exercise to acknowledge the common ground with the mental health challenges we all face. The stigma surrounding mental health has multiple layers and affects all of us. None of you are defined, but what you wrote down on that poll everywhere. Most of you are who you are because you have worked on these issues that have happened to you. So building a foundation of how to address mental health requires honest and open communication. And healing happens when we allow ourselves to share our thoughts and feelings. Each person's experience with mental health is different. However, we have the ability to connect with one another when we open up in conversation. And taking this perspective can help remind us that we're not alone. So this next lesson will be diving into identifying your own mental health. So this exercise is designed to help us better understand the range of mental health challenges people experience in life and give us a map to better determine what is happening to us and how to talk about what we're going through. So at the start of this workshop, we discussed the various challenges that students may be experiencing, including mental health disorders, breakups, stress, finances, etc. And this can make it difficult to find a healthy balance, and everyone may perceive and deal with these challenges in different ways. So this exercise is designed to help us understand and separate those challenges. So what we're going to do as a group is look at these 5 different categories of challenges, and we're going to have a few different challenges and separate them into the different categories. So I'm going to start by kind of sharing what each of these categories means. So an everyday challenge is an issue all of us try to balance on an everyday basis. An environmental factor is how the environment, like the home you grew up in or the school you attend and the way you were raised, affects one's mental health. And then a significant event is an experience with a loss, change, or rejection that has a big impact on one's life. And then a mental health disorder is any disorder that can be diagnosed by a mental health professional. And finally, a developmental disability is a disability that manifests before a person reaches 22 that can cause significant impairment in a person's life. So what I'm going to do is share kind of an activity screen, and we're going to decide what challenge should go into what category. And I'm just gonna switch it. Oh, sorry. I'm going to switch to the activity real quick. Okay, so we're going to just kind of work with through this as a group. I'm going to have Justice read the chat. So down here are all the different challenges, and we're going to kind of decide what category it might fit into. So if you think you have an answer, feel free to just shout it out or type in the chat. I can zoom in a little bit too, so you can read that easier. And I'll read a few of them out loud. There's unhealthy stress, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorders, death, eating disorders, schizophrenia, autism, ADHD, parents with addiction, divorce, rejection, identifying sexual orientation, sexual abuse, body image issues, depression, physical abuse, intellectual disabilities, adjusting to college, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, breakups, borderline personality disorder, low self-esteem, lack of sleep. Okay, ADHD for environment factor. Okay, looks like I got a private message saying ADHD might be an environmental factor because of distractions. What else? What about unhealthy stress? Where might that fall?
Maybe in everyday challenges.
Yeah. Okay, what about anxiety disorders? Where might that fall?
Every day.
Yeah, that could be an everyday challenge. I also wanted to know these challenges could fall into multiple categories. So for example, you know, bullying could be an everyday challenge, but it could also be a significant event that occurred one time.
Alyssa said a lack of sleep is an everyday challenge.
Mhm.
Deaths as significant events from faith.
What else about eating disorders?
Deja says body image issues is an everyday challenge.
Oh, there it is. Everyday challenge. Okay.
She also, Zachary says it could be developmental too. Sarah Anderton says bullying is environmental. Jake says divorce is a significant event. Meredith says intellectual disabilities are developmental disabilities. And Colin says divorce and breakups are significant events.
Okay. Did I miss any?
I don't think so. Olivia says autism is developmental. Parents with addictions is an environmental factor from Sarah. Faith says bipolar disorder is a mental health disorder. And Peyton says rejection is a significant event. Lissa says adjusting to college is also a significant event. Kai says physical abuse is an environmental factor, and Estella says sexual abuse is a significant event or environmental event as well. Peyton says borderline personality disorder is a mental health disorder. Olivia says depression is mental health. Kyle says identifying sexual orientation could be everyday challenge, environmental factor, and significant event. Estella says low self-esteem is environmental.
This here.
Drug and alcohol addiction, significant event, and environmental factors. Also, everyday challenges, drug and alcohol addiction.
Mhm. So some overlap happening here.
Yeah.
What about these last two?
Schizophrenia, both mental health disorder and developmental. Eating disorders is mental health.
All right, so it looks like we have those broken into categories. We had some overlap with a few of them. So I'm just gonna thank you all again for participating. I'm just gonna pull up my PowerPoint again and kind of show you what we had for the answers. Sorry about that. Okay, so these are the answers that kind of health promotion came up with. But again, a lot of these could overlap into different categories. Like you all said, adjusting to college could be a significant event for someone in their first semester, but for others, it could be an ongoing challenge they deal with every day. So I just wanted to share all that with you. However, the developmental disabilities and mental health disorders are pertain to these categories, but they can cause, challenges on the everyday. They can have environmental factors, and it could be a significant event. So we're all trying to address different challenges in our lives, yet sometimes we aren't talking about them with those who can help. So opening up allows us to support each other and gives space for us to learn more about mental health. It can also help us to learn how to be there when it matters most. So this next exercise is designed to help us get an accurate assessment of where we are on the mental health spectrum so we can be more open and understand what we may need to work on. Additionally, it will help us understand that our mental health can fluctuate depending on the day, week, month, year, etc., and our life situations, as well as give us a tool that we can use to help us identify what resources or support we may need. So we all land somewhere on this mental health spectrum, from the left side able to balance to the right side of not able to balance, or somewhere in between. And when we have an accurate assessment of where we are on this spectrum, we can be more open and understand what we may need to work on. So these are the definitions of each of those parts of the mental health spectrum. So just go ahead and kind of read through these and individually think of where you may fall on the mental health spectrum today. And you can be in between two categories. For example, you could be kind of in between difficult to balance and needs assistance to balance. And just remember where you fall on the spectrum today may not be where you are next week or next month. So just go ahead and kind of individually think of where you may fall. I'll give you all a minute or so to do that. And if you feel comfortable, feel free to share in the chat where you fall. Okay, hopefully you all have kind of a better idea of where you may fall on this spectrum. There it is again. So doing this exercise and finding out where we fall on this spectrum kind of helps us evaluate how our own mental health is doing. And being able to recognize where you land on the spectrum can help you understand what resources or support you may need and how to better regulate your thoughts and emotions in a healthy way. So it's important for us to communicate with each other about our mental health, and by letting each other know how and where we are on this spectrum, we can better support one another and find that balance. And again, remember where we are on that spectrum today is not necessarily where we're going to be in a week or month. And as our situations change, our ability to address what is happening can also change. And if you need to talk to someone about your mental health, the Counseling Center on campus, CAPS, is always a great place to start. So we've talked a lot about individual aspects of mental health. So our final lesson is going to be diving into how we can better communicate with our friends and support their mental health and well-being as well. So talking about mental health and intervening with a friend can be challenging. So we want to share some tips and strategies that you can use. So sometimes ways we approach a friend to ask them if something is wrong can make them defensive. So it's important to approach your friend by letting them know that you care about them, because it can help someone feel more comfortable to talk about what is wrong and seek help. So the first tip we have is discuss observations and concerning behaviors with a friend. And we want to keep these observations objective and remain neutral. Small things can be helpful, and it shows that you're paying attention and you care. And stating observations helps to limit defensiveness, which can be a natural reaction. So there's some examples on the board here. Things like, you're not doing the things you used to do and I'm concerned, or hey, I've noticed you haven't been going to your classes. I'm your friend and I just want to make sure you're okay. The next tip we have is to ask open-ended questions. And these can be really helpful because they allow your friend to talk about what is wrong. It's helpful to let them say anything and everything they want to say, rather than close-ended questions tend to shut down the conversation with like a yes or no answer, and doesn't really allow for elaboration on your friend's experience. So some examples up here are, how are you? How have you been feeling? What have you been thinking about? Has something changed in your life? How can I support you? Can you tell me more about what this means? What do you mean when you say this? And also, it can be challenging to intervene with a friend and can take a lot of time and energy to care for someone you're concerned about. So it's important that we don't forget about our own self-care in the process of helping a friend. So some ways to practice self-care is getting sleep, exercise, making time for yourself, doing something fun, maybe writing your emotions down in a journal, seeing friends or family, having that support system, practicing yoga. Does anyone else want to share any examples of ways they practice self-care? Oh, and earlier we had in the chat the COVID environment really has exacerbated mental health issues. Yeah, definitely there has been, an increase in that, as well as maybe people not getting the help they need and a little bit less of support, one-on-one support. Peyton says setting time limits on social media. Long drives to nowhere in particular. Reading a good book instead of watching TV. Staying off social media. Meditation. Music. All right, thank you all so much for sharing your self-care practices. And lastly, what if your friend doesn't want help? You can refer your friend to resources if they don't want help or don't want to seek out resources. You can use them. You can use resources yourself as well to get more information or find other ways to help. For example, You could call CAPS about a friend and ask for advice while keeping your friend's name anonymous, just to see if there's anything you can do or if they should be connected to resources. And then you just want to never give up on your friend. Let them know your door is always open. Keep listening to them and just make sure you're doing it in a non-judgmental way. So one of the most important things to do is to make sure your friend knows you care. When you acknowledge that you're starting a conversation for their well-being, it can help to establish trust and allow them to feel more comfortable opening up to you. So be sure to use active listening skills, validate their feelings, and reassure them that you are there for them. And also, you can encourage your friend to seek out help and utilize the many resources available here at Wazoo. And with that being said, I have some resources I wanted to share with you all today. So as I mentioned earlier, the Counseling and Psychological Services CAPS is in the Washington building. They are offering telehealth appointments currently due to COVID, and they also have a 24/7 crisis line. And then we have the medical clinic, which is also in the Washington building and has telehealth appointments as well. And they also have a 24-hour nurse on call. And then the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the Crisis Text Line. The Student Care Network is an online reporting forum that you can find at studentcare.wsu.edu. And it allows individuals to share concerns about a student's well-being. And it's run by the Dean of Students office, sorry. So they'll look at that form and figure out the best action plan for that student and send them resources. And then finally, Pullman Regional Hospital. All right, so that is the end of our program today. So thank you all so much for coming and participating. And it looks like there is an exit survey in the chat. So once you finish that exit survey, you are free to go. Thank you.
Thank you all, everyone. Don't forget, the exit survey is to give you credit for attending this event. Thank you to Justice and Elizabeth for an amazing presentation. And thank you all for being so vulnerable during this conversation. I think you realize that that a lot of us are going through the same things, same experiences that you're going through. So it's okay to feel this way. I want to remind you that we do have other disability awareness events happening throughout the week. Our last event today is at 4 p.m. Cassandra Yarlot's Adaptive Yoga. So we hope to see you there and hope to see you at our remaining events throughout the semester. Thank you all so much. Elizabeth and Justice will be here for a couple minutes, so if anyone has any questions specifically for them or they want to make any comments, you can do so at this time. All right. Thank you everyone so much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and end the session. Thank you, Justice. Thank you, Elizabeth. I will send you a follow-up email. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, you too.